Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. Do you remember who gave this advice? It was many years ago. It was a sage, wise man. His advice was, obey the law, use common sense, stop immediately, turn that blank off, be polite, and shut the blank up. Do you remember who said that? I'll tell you here in a couple minutes. I want to spend this segment here making sense of the aftermath of the police shooting that happened on Sunday in Minneapolis. Daunte Wright, 20 years old, pulled over in Brooklyn Center, which is just outside Minneapolis. He was getting handcuffed because there's a warrant out for his arrest. And as he was getting handcuffed, he got away, got in the car. There's a female police officer who was going to tase him. She said, I'm going to tase you, I'm going to tase you, tase, tase, tase. She pulled the trigger, but it wasn't her taser, it was an actual gun. Shot him, he drove away, got in a wreck, and died. Riots, looting, etc. have ensued. We know now the reason why there was a warrant out for his arrest. Aggravated armed robbery. He robbed a woman of $820 cash at gunpoint. He choked her. She got away and he fled the scene. He was then arrested, released on $100,000 bail, and he did not show up to his court date, hence the warrant for his arrest. So another hero of the Black Lives Matter activists. I got 3 points I want to make here. 3 points about the aftermath. First, people getting fired for speaking, I don't even want to say speaking the truth, like speaking of the most basic principle of America that can exist, right? The city manager of Brooklyn Center. So a city manager, you have the mayor, and then you have your city manager. And I kind of liken it to the mayor's the king, and the city manager's like the prime minister, if that helps at all. Like the mayor is more of like a figurehead position, and the city manager is the one who's actually getting the stuff done. And at least in California, the city manager gets paid like 4 times as much as the mayor does, but no one even knows who the city manager is. So anyway, the city manager of Brooklyn was fired. They fired him. The city council and the mayor, they fired the city manager. And you're thinking, oh, geez, what could possibly have happened? What did the city manager do? This was 2 days ago during the initial press conference. Here's the city manager.
All employees working for the city of Brooklyn Center are entitled to due process with respect to discipline. This employee will receive due process, and that's really all that I can say today.
Fired for saying that the police officer who pulled the trigger gets due process. Fired for that. And you're thinking, oh, no way could it just be for that. How could you possibly be fired for that? No, it was for that. Here are the activists who are passing as journalists that were in that press conference there. I don't know how these people got into the room. I don't know what newspaper they work for, but I guess, activists and journalists is the same thing these days. Here was the immediate reaction when he talked about due process for the police officer.
Racial profiling that happened in this situation. We are standing in solidarity and calling for the firing of this officer. You have talked about her having due process, although Daunte Wright did not get due process in that situation. She needs to be fired immediately to send a message that this type of behavior will not be condoned within the city of Brooklyn Center.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments.
Like, who is that person? What kind of journalist is that? We call for the firing. It's amazing. And that was it. That's why he got fired, for saying, I just really want this to sit in. This is insane, that the police officer should get due process. And the city council voted. There was a city councilwoman who said she voted to fire that guy out of fear of potential attacks from protesters if she did not. Here's what she said. She said, he was doing a great job. I respect him dearly. I didn't want repercussions at a personal level. She was afraid of the mob. Amazing. So first aftermath, people getting fired for speaking truth, like the most basic things you can utter, due process. Second point of aftermath. Apparently, now we're supposed to be talking about taking guns away from police officers. The governor of Minnesota alluded to this in his initial press conference as well. right? Like talked about, is the ability to have lethal force necessary at all traffic stops? That was the governor a couple days ago. This is the mayor of Brooklyn Center yesterday.
I don't believe that officers need to necessarily have weapons, every time they're making a traffic stop or engaged in situations that don't necessarily call for weapons.
That is so insane. There's no such thing as a routine traffic stop. You're a police officer. You have no idea who's inside that car, what they're hiding, what they're up to, and how desperately they don't want to go to jail. There's no such thing as a routine traffic stop. That is absolute ignorance. Actually, I'll give you a little hint. Remember that our little quiz up at the top? Who first said, obey the law, use common sense, stop immediately, turn that S off, be polite, and shut the blank up? Who said that? I'll give you a little hint. I'm going to tell you at the end of the segment. I'll give you a little hint. This person would say that what that mayor just said is ignorant. That's ignorant. But he's not the only one. This is Rashid Tlaib, one of the squad congresswomen with AOC. She says it wasn't an accident, which is a pretty bold claim that officer who yells, tase, 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 and then shot the gun by accident. To say that was on purpose is quite a bold claim. Policing in our country is inherently and intentionally racist. Daunte Wright was met with aggression and violence. I'm done with those who condone government-funded murder. No more policing. Incarceration and militarization, it can't be reformed. How about that? No more policing. So we've gone from defund the police to no more police. How about that? Also, maybe worth noting that Daunte Wright was not met with violence. We've all seen the dashboard cam or the body cam by now. I guess it does start in the middle, but it all seemed very calm, right? He was standing there, the cop was putting handcuffs on him. Everyone seemed pretty calm about the whole thing until he tried to escape. So I would question whether or not he was actually met with violence. And as soon as he tried to escape, obviously, it escalated very quickly. She's not kidding, though, about no more policing. We've talked a lot on this show about these rogue DAs, district attorneys, George Soros-funded district attorneys who have their prosecutorial discretion on what crimes they're going to prosecute and which they're not. And we have these rogue DAs all across the country, and big cities in particular, who are choosing not to prosecute the most basic of crimes. And then if you're a police officer and you arrest someone for, let's say, public intoxication or trespassing. Let's do trespassing. You arrest someone for trespassing, but they're immediately let out an hour later because the DA's office doesn't prosecute. You're gonna stop arresting people for trespassing. What's the point? They're just gonna get out right away. It's a waste of time. So the DAs have the ability to cause no more policing. If you're a police officer and you're not going to arrest people anymore, that's no more policing. They're not kidding about that. Check this out. This is from this is an article about Baltimore, March 26th. All right, just 4 weeks ago, March 26th, Washington Post. After crime plummeted in 2020, Baltimore will stop drug and sex prosecutions. And this article goes on to argue that this is a good idea, that it's a good thing to do this, to no longer prosecute drug or sex crimes. 3 weeks later, the same newspaper, in crime-battled Baltimore, a halt to some drug and prostitution prosecutions is causing fresh anxiety. No kidding. And they talk about a government worker who, on her walk around town, has to encounter prostitutes all over the street. And she saw a guy having sex in his car on her block. It was 4 p.m. And the woman said, how far does this go? She said, I don't understand how you uphold the law if you exempt criminal behavior. Well, there is no upholding the law. There's no such thing as the law. No more policing. Remember? Who are these DAs working for? It's amazing. They truly believe in no more policing. That's where we're headed. Third aftermath of the shooting the other day. The narrative has been formed, and there's no changing it. As I predicted on Monday, and this is not a hard prediction, so I'm not patting myself on the back, the narrative was that Daunte Wright was murdered for having an air freshener in his rear view window. I could regale you with countless tweets on this point. I'll just give you this one from D.L. Hughley. D.L. Hughley, one of the original kings of comedy, actor, comedian. He's got, 500,000 Twitter followers or something like that. He tweeted this out. He said, all right, so black people can't jog or play video games or eat ice cream in apartments or go to sleep after a long day of work. That's Breonna Taylor she's referencing. Or reach for their license after being told to do so, or break up a fight. That's amazing. He's talking about Jacob Blake there in Wisconsin. That was the guy who raped a woman. There was a warrant out for his arrest. He tried to kidnap their children while stealing her car. She called police. He had a knife while resisting arrest. And that's characterized as breaking up a fight, because that was the original narrative. Like, oh, police just shot this guy who pulled over because he was breaking up a fight. And that never happened at all. Or have air fresheners in a car. I said on Monday, this is how they do it. All right? Activists, they find a police altercation and then they highlight the most mundane thing about that moment, and they say that that's the reason why this person was murdered. You can't even eat ice cream and be black in America. Black in America, you can't even eat ice cream, you get murdered. It's like, oh, well, no, there were some other things that were taking place at the moment. It wasn't the eating ice cream, just like in this case, it wasn't the air freshener, right? When the Navy SEALs killed bin Laden, can't even be a Muslim and sleep in your own bed these days. Can't even sleep in your bed with one of your wives if you're a Muslim today in your own compound in Pakistan without the U.S. military coming in with helicopters, busting down the door and blowing your brains out. Unbelievable. Like, there's other reasons why the SEALs killed bin Laden. It wasn't because he was sleeping. That wasn't why they... It's the same thing they do. They really do. They ignore the real reason why the altercation even took place in the first place. And then they, of course, ignore the reason why things got escalated to the point that it did. It had nothing to do with an air freshener. And I don't know, we'll find out in the investigation, but if you watch the body cam footage, there wasn't even an air freshener in the window, in the rearview mirror. So I don't know, maybe he took it down, or maybe it was like one in the back mirror. I don't know. But in the front rearview mirror, there's not even an air freshener there. Amazing. So the second part of that prediction is, so this is what happened. So someone's killed, the activists pick the most mundane reason why, and then when the truth comes out, and you're like, oh no, there was a warrant out for his arrest, and he resisted arrest, then the activists come back and say, oh, well, that's enough reason to be murdered. And just on clockwork. Listen, don't run from the police. There is no way, and here's the answer to the trivia question at the top of the show today. Who said this line? There's no way that Chris Rock would have been able to make this bit today. There is not a chance. This is from his show back in 1997. I told our producers, it's a 2-minute and 30-second clip. I told them to play as much as we possibly can on the radio or on the TV here. I don't know how much of it will actually make it. Let's give it a shot. Here it is.
First, obey the law. Laws were made for a reason. Think of them as hints. You've heard people say, man, I wouldn't do that if I was you. Well, here's some of that carjacking, armed robbery, arson, selling drugs, buying drugs, stabbing, shooting. You know, you probably won't get your kicked if you just use common sense. If you jump a subway turnstile, you might just get off with a warning from the police. But if you jump a turnstile carrying a loaded gun and smoking a joint, then maybe you need your kicked. When you see flashing police lights in your mirror, stop immediately. Everybody knows, if the police have to come and get you, they're bringing a kicking with it. When an officer approaches your car, be polite.
Is there a problem, officer?
And stay in your car with your hands on the wheel.
What the do you want, mother?
Unless you want your
We'll put the I'll put the whole clip on MikeSlater.locals.com. He concludes with, obey the law, use common sense, stop immediately, turn that blank off, meaning the rap music when you get pulled over, be polite, and shut the blank up. Is he wrong? Why is that no longer true? I want to come back and talk about the cultural roots of what this is. And this is a defining difference between progressives and conservatives when it comes to personal responsibility. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, shout out to everyone watching on Facebook Live. So I love reading your comments and checking it out during the breaks here. So I appreciate everyone doing that, among the many other ways to watch us as well. So let's put a bit of a conclusion on this, right? What do we do? Everyone's know, what do we do? What are we supposed to do? The shootings, the crime, the violence, the nihilism, the hopelessness, the helplessness. Whenever a shooting like this happens in Minneapolis, it creates this moral panic. Everyone freaks out and is desperate and wants answers on what to do. And the problem with answering a question like this is we've been trained to demand easy answers. Thanks a lot, Amazon Prime. We want like immediate answers. We want the easy button. What do I do to fix this? Oh, just press that button and it will magically be solved? Why didn't you tell me? And then boom. That's not how it works. Not important things. And also, we don't want to hear the truth in our culture because the truth that I'm going to share here, of course, is, it's very judgmental. You don't be judgy. And also, what I'm going to say here doesn't change the past, which is what people really want to do. They want to change the past, but that's impossible. You can't do that. So what I'm going to talk about is future-oriented, which makes it very unfulfilling. And it's also about personal responsibility, and no one wants to hear that. And that's a major difference between conservatives and progressives in this country, which I'll get to in just a second. I'm sure you've been wondering, why do I have to play a clip from Chris Rock from 1997 to tell people to obey the law, right? Like, why isn't that just the cultural, unanimous message that comes out of things like this? Like, don't use your gun to choke a woman and rob her. If you do, show up for your court date. And if you don't try to run away from police. Like, why isn't that everyone saying, like, where are the black church leaders? Where are the activist leaders giving that message? And just generally telling kids, in many of these cases, just to knock it off. Obey the police. Or better yet, don't do illegal things and get warrants out for your arrest in the first place. Or Breonna Taylor, don't hang around drug dealers. Or Jacob Blake, don't rape your girlfriend and abduct your children. Make good decisions, people. Right? Where are the people? Where are the people? Like, I know you're screaming, like, where are the people saying make good decisions? Maybe they're out there, but the voices don't get amplified. Because if you tell someone to make good decisions, well, you're blaming the victim. Let's back it up here. Here's the cultural narrative of the day. The cultural ethos of the day is nothing is ever your fault. Nothing is ever your fault. The system is against you. The world is against you. You have no control over your actions. And even if you did have control over your actions, there's no way you can overcome anything that's stacked. I mean, everything's stacked against you. There's no way you could overcome it. You didn't do anything. You're perfect. You're not the problem here. That's the cultural message of the day. It's a flat lie. And we've all done it, and we see every kid do it too, right? So maybe your kid has come back with bad grades, or you remember when you got bad grades in a class in school. And what's your first excuse? What's the first excuse that every kid gives when they get a bad grade? The teacher doesn't like me. That's always the first thing a kid says, right? Sure, it has nothing to do with my bad attitude, me acting up in class, me not paying attention, me not ever doing any work or ever studying and failing tests. No. The teacher doesn't like me. That's what it all comes down to. I'm not the problem. And the same thing here culturally, right? I'm not the problem. Slavery is the problem. White supremacy is the problem. The system's the problem. Capitalism is the problem. I didn't stab someone. The knife went in. One of my favorite writers, Theodore Dalrymple, I won't go on and on about how much I love his books, but please buy them all. He has one called, the one in particular is like Life at the Bottom. And he talks about these criminals who they'll describe what happened the day that they got arrested, and it's in great detail, like I was here and this, and then when it gets to the stabbing, it becomes very passive. It's not, oh, and then I stabbed her. It's, oh, and then the knife went in. My hand did not guide the knife inside of her. The knife guided my hand. Not my fault. That's the cultural ethos of the day. 2 days ago on my radio show, we had a lot of people call in and talk about how there's a lot of lack of respect in our culture today, and that's definitely true. There's lack of respect for others, lack of respect for authority, but it's also lack of respect for the truth, and also a lack of respect for yourself. And when you don't respect yourself, you have no honor. And an honorable person has personal responsibility and takes accountability. Doesn't rob people, shows up for court dates, doesn't try to run from cops, for instance. And the reason why the left says we can't talk about personal responsibility is because if you talk about choices, how do I word this? A progressive believes that if a conservative comes in and says, hey, you need to make good choices, or that person didn't make good choices, then it takes away all sympathy. Let me put it like this. We've gone to our extremes, right? Conservatives have gone to this extreme of, oh, come on, buck up, make good choices, pull yourself up from your bootstraps, with no sympathy, no empathy. Progressives have gone to this other extreme of, oh, you poor child. There's nothing you could have done. There's nothing, the whole world's against you. I'm so sorry. Neither of those are right? The truth is, hey, man, you were given a very difficult deck to deal with in your life. No doubt about it. Single mom, no father, broken culture around you. The easiest way for you to feel loved and accepted is to join a gang, which are all around everywhere in your face, everywhere you go. Every pop culture influence around you is telling you to do all the wrong things. And that is difficult. And you need to make good choices. So it's the empathy of, man, you're in a bad situation. And the reality of, you need to make good choices. Make sense? This is where people on the ground, parents, pastors, mentors need to step up and help guide people through the jungle of evil that's around them in our culture today. But I reject the belief, the progressive belief, that to believe in personal responsibility is to remove all empathy. Not only is the progressive belief of it's just all empathy, not only is that wrong and harmful and damaging, it's sentimental, it's condescending, and it's dehumanizing. It is dehumanizing to look at someone with self-destructive habits and view them as only a victim of circumstance, because you're treating them as an animal. You're treating them as subhuman. You're telling this person that they can't even control the smallest details of their lives? You think that little of your fellow man? And you pat yourself on the back for being the compassionate one? I don't think so. But the progressives love that view. Why? Why do progressives love this view of their fellow man? Because if someone is subhuman, this is super important. If someone is less than human, if someone is subhuman, if someone is not able to help themselves, then who do they need? They need a savior. They need a savior. Oh, and who's the right man for the job? I am. I'm the right man for the job. Vote for me. I'll save you. Vote for me, love me, praise me, worship me, follow me, pay me. So the co-founder of Black Lives Matter can buy her 5th house. And I'll rescue you. So people, they do that. They elect the black mayor, the black police chief, they root for LeBron, they listen to Cardi B, and still make terrible choices. And they wonder why nothing improves. Like, what the heck? I worshiped you, I followed you, I praised you, I loved you, I voted for you, I paid you. Why is my life still terrible? You kept making bad choices. I got to run here. I was reading yesterday 2 Timothy 3, and it ends with this line from Paul says, all scripture is God-breathed, profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. And every word we can do a study on, but the word that really stood out when I first read that the other day was the word correction. So I did a little dive into that. So the Greek word used there, it's actually 3 words combined. Epinorthosis. So ortho means, well, it's where we get the word orthopedics. It means straight. The skeletal system, straight. Ortho means straight. ANA means again, and then epi, the beginning of the word, means properly, as in something fitting together properly. So the word means to set straight again properly. We translate that as correction. The scripture is profitable for correction. Set straight again properly. So reproof, that means criticism, rebuking. Like, hey man, you're doing it wrong. Correction, let's set you straight again. And then training in righteousness. Here's the right way to do things. So it deals with the past, rebuking for past action, correcting in the present, and training in righteousness continually in the future, in the present tense, like constantly, always. That's what scripture can do. But we don't accept that in society. We don't accept it because, rebuking itself, right? You can't even get off the ground because you're not allowed to rebuke someone because then you're judging. You're judging them. You're not allowed to judge. Right? Like, don't try to rob a woman at gunpoint and choke her. Oh, who are you to judge? You don't know my situation, blah, 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 or whatever, right? And now, as we talked about in the last segment, you can't even use the law. So, you want to stop all these things, these bad things from happening? Strike the root. Or give more money to Black Lives Matter so, the founder can buy her 5th house. True story. Thanks, Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. We've talked a lot on the show over the last months about the Marxist march through the institutions. So it's a complete takeover of all the cultural institutions in America. Started with the universities, and the last domino to fall is companies, corporations. And corporate wokeism today is completely out of control and very discouraging. This is a New York Post article. 120 CEOs gathered to discuss how they would exert corporate pressure to influence voting legislation. This is organized by a professor at the Yale School of Management. They thought they'd have 25 CEOs. They got 120. And here's a statement from the group. CEOs who participated in a live poll indicated they will reevaluate donations to candidates supporting bills that restrict voting rights, and many would reconsider investments in states which act upon such proposals. It's insane. Thomas Lindsay is here. He's from the wonderful Texas Public Policy Foundation. Mr. Lindsay, how are you, sir?
I am well. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Really good to talk to you. I know you at the Texas Public Policy Foundation had a great talk with our friend Chris Rufo and also Wade Miller about how to combat critical race theory, and it's available on your website now, and I want people to go watch it. Can you describe this march through the institutions? What is this that we see around us happening?
Yeah, that's really the question. Critical race theory is the instrument being used for the march through the higher ed institutions and through all the institutions of America. For your audience, let me just summarize what critical race theory is, and then I'll explain the reason for my definition. Critical race theory is a lie, and it's not only a lie, it's a hateful, hostile, manipulative lie. Now, people hear critical race theory and they think, what is this? Well, it appears under the name of implicit bias / sensitivity training that is used in corporations. It's used by schools under the titles of culturally or ethnically responsive pedagogy. A couple of examples, New York Times 1619 Project and Seattle's ethno-mathematics. Seattle is actually teaching that math depends on race. So these groups, along with their allies in the press and in education, they try to present critical race theory as anti-racism and as diversity, equity, and inclusion. But in reality, it's exactly the opposite. It is instead repressive, discriminatory, and hostile.
To make the claim, it's wild that people are falling for us, to make the claim that white people are all inherently racist and oppressors, and that all people of color are inherently victims and helpless to it. It's so insane that it's gotten so much traction so quickly.
Yes. Yes.
Do you think the businesses, going back to the corporations who are just tripping over themselves to proclaim their wokeness, do you think the people who run these organizations, do you think they believe it? Do they really believe it, these CEOs and boards, or are they just going along to get along and maybe make some money off of it?
Yeah, well, that's a question all of us are trying to figure out. Now, look, Vladimir Lenin, founder of Russian Revolution, right? He said, quote, the capitalists will fight with each other over who gets to sell us the rope with which we hang them. So he saw something implicit in this, in capitalism, that it would come to support this. And I think what these corporations think is that they are making the proper marketing decision based on their analysis of the buying habits of their key demographics.
It's so weird because
Yes.
It's right that it's culturally the right move, but so few people really agree with this critical race stuff, especially once they actually hear it.
Yes, well, that's the good news. The good news is when people find out what this is, they're horrified.
So what do we do, right? So how do we combat this? What's your suggestions? What was the conclusion of y'all's talk the other day?
Well, there are a number of bills around the country that would seek to ban this. And really, it should go under the title of banning any sort of teaching in public schools that teaches any doctrine of racial superiority, of racial scapegoating, right? So that would rule out the Ku Klux Klan on one side and Black Lives Matter on the other.
Yep, which are not that different.
They are not that different. That's right. They are not that, unfortunately. Look, critical race theory is the new racism, but it presents itself as good racism. That's the point at which we've come today.
What about culturally, right? So it's one thing legally, and I know that's your focus at the Texas Public Policy Institute. But what cultural suggestions would you suggest? Would you make that we can just turn the tide, where companies would realize this isn't a popular thing, and we won't market ourselves like this?
Well, parents ask me this all the time about what's happening in their schools. And, the first thing you tell them is, you've got to go to the school board meetings. Better yet, run for the school board. Let these corporations know that you are unhappy. Because, look, corporations, just like school boards and university administrations, they respond to heat, right? The heat has all come from the far left. Heat has got to be exerted from the side that still loves this country. right? Because, what I ask people is this. I ask them, have you ever heard of a country in the history of the world that required its citizens to subsidize through their tax dollars teaching their children to hate their own country?
I know. Yep.
That's where we are. Yeah.
Literally, as you're saying that, I was thinking, has there ever been a country that's been taught to hate itself as much as we have? I don't know if that's ever happened, and it certainly can't survive that way.
No.
Because what's worth fighting for?
Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was going to say, I mean, there's nothing worth fighting for if we're a horrible, evil, racist country to our core.
Exactly right. Of course, that's the whole purpose, is to demoralize us. And I don't think it's working on the American people, but it's working on these corporations. So we've got to, it's got to be a ground up rebellion against this anti-American hateful doctrine. Otherwise, our experiment in democracy is over.
Yeah, because the attacks are coming from the top down. So you're right, it's got to be bottom up. Thomas Lindsay, let's talk again. Keep up the wonderful work at the Texas Public Policy Institute. It's texaspolicy.com, and you can watch Chris Rufo and others talk more about this. Thanks, Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. We got to run, but we'll do another segment maybe tomorrow on the similarities between the KKK and wokeism. It's unbelievable. If you didn't know who was instituting these policies, you would think like the Grand Wizard of the Klan was. And it's like, oh, no, it's actually a Black Lives Matter leader. It's like, what? Coming up next, talk about Medicare for all. True story. Mike Slater, Brother Word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, we just went through a whole year plus of COVID mandates, but so many times the mandates were for you and not on the people who issued the mandates themselves. Countless examples. Maybe the most famous is Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, going out to eat at the French Laundry. That's one of so many examples. We could spend the entire segment going over all of them. Well, the elites have a very long history of this. Laws for you, the little people, but not for them. Paul Moreno is here. He's a professor of history at Hillsdale College, which is quickly becoming the only university I would allow my kids to go to. And he's the author of The Bureaucratic Kings, The Origins and Underpinnings of America's Bureaucratic State. Professor, how are you, sir?
Very good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Good to talk to you. So you wrote this article, and it specifically is about Medicare for all. What's the latest with that? And do you think the elites would be subject to it as well?
Well, a comprehensive Medicare thing doesn't seem to be in the works, but there's a great piece yesterday describing the way in which the so-called infrastructure package is really sort of smuggling in the Green New Deal agenda. So there may well be, parts of that, or the sort of universal health insurance are going to be done in unusual ways. But the point I tried to make was that the elites, the ruling classes, are certainly not going to subject themselves to the kind of socialized medicine that they impose on the rest of us.
What's the history of that in our country?
Well, when the administrative state began to be built in the 1930s in the New Deal, it quickly became self-dealing, where the people who designed these agencies, sometimes this is called the revolving door syndrome in Washington, D.C., then established big law firms in which they could, advise corporations that had to comply with the rules that they made. So there's a great deal of self-dealing in all this. This system became very profitable for the insiders, the super lawyers, as they came to be called.
Lay that out one more time. And as I ask that, did the beginnings of the bureaucratic state, the administrative state, did it ever have good intentions, or was it purely a grifting project?
Well, good intentions in the sense of these people who think that basically the American people are not capable of governing themselves. Some of them, people like Herbert Crowley, who is one of the most important sort of philosophers of the administrative state, were very frank about that. I said, Americans just are not capable of democratic self-government. They need smarter people like us, the scientific experts of the kind that we've seen, running amok in the past year, to make all of their choices for them. Alexis de Tocqueville in Democracy in America, 100 years earlier than this, sort of envisioned this, where he said that there was a tendency in democratic societies a desire for equality, especially, that would drive Americans to adopt a state we call the nanny state today. The state that sort of governs you for your own good, and tries to stop all our habits like smoking. That was one of the big ones, and a whole bunch of others.
Do you think that is done to fill a void that the people have left, or is it more of the elites coming in and commanding it?
Yeah, one of the things that I recognized when I was writing this book was the religious basis of this. A lot of this movement in the 19th century was especially among liberal Protestants, the so-called social gospel movement, and a kind of post-millennialism, as they call it, a belief that we could bring about heaven on earth, and that we could perfect society. We saw this in the 19th century with campaigns for social reform to improve prisons. The anti-slavery crusade, of course, was the foremost among them. But to end drinking, and culminating in the prohibition movement. So it's a kind of religious effort. The old idea that, well, life on earth is a vale of tears and your reward is in heaven. People got more ambitious than that and thought they could bring about heaven on earth. I think that's the bottom line as Americans move from one kind of religion to another. Yeah,
heaven on earth is one thing, right? Doing it through the force of a gun, through the force of the state, is a whole other, right? Yeah. Like that's where the problem comes in. Can you give me a more current example that we can wrap our heads around of this at work, and the alternative, how you think a free people would be capable of doing this on their own?
Well, I think the pandemic that we're going through right now is a perfect example of this. You mentioned Gavin Newsom in California. We have our own examples of that, sort of hypocrisy with Gretchen Whitmer here in Michigan. And the idea that, we've been through epidemics like this before in our history. This one is really nothing in comparison to the post-World War I influenza pandemic. But the idea that we could actually, shut down society as a way of preventing the spread of this disease, it becomes clearer and clearer every day that the lockdowns and all the responses to this did much more harm than good. And we're going to be seeing the fallout of this for years ahead. And again, this is all based upon, trusting the science and the data and all that. Whereas, ultimately these that's been one of the claims of the administrative state from the very beginning, that you could handle these kinds of what are essentially political questions in an expert and scientific way that's divorced from politics. And that's the greatest illusion of the whole system.
Okay, as opposed, because I understand the human nature desire for that, obviously, right? It's power and control and arrogance and pride. What's the alternative?
Well, I think, in fact, what we've resorted to now in Michigan, I think the public reaction now to the overreaction of the government has become so great that, for instance, in Michigan, the governor has now just, advised us, to act sensibly and cautiously. That's what they should have done from the beginning. They should have, protected the most vulnerable, especially the elderly first. We saw how that worked out, especially in New York. Again, this is, the whole history of this is that people identify a problem, government intervenes to solve that problem, and only makes it worse. We saw that in the financial debacle of about 10 years ago. The whole history of the Federal Reserve System, which was supposed to sort of take monetary questions out of politics, they were responsible for the exacerbating the post-World War I depression, and especially the Great Depression in the 1930s. And every time they screw up, they just get more power. That's how government works. Nothing succeeds in Washington like failure.
Oh, wow. And the next pandemic, I don't think we'll learn a lesson. The lesson will be, as you said, well, we just need to shut down harder.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Paul Moreno, thanks for your time, Professor, at Hillsdale College, and author of The Bureaucratic Kings, The Origins and Underpinnings of America's Bureaucratic State. I hope my kids have you as a professor one day, Professor.
I look forward to having them on our kids.
Have a great. They're only 4. My oldest is 4, so you got a while, but hopefully they're still there. Thanks, Professor.
Okay.
You too. Tomorrow on the show, I'm so excited. Stephen Meyer is here, and he's got a new book called something I forget, but of course we'll have it tomorrow. And he is all about creationism and debunking evolution, the theory that is very debunkable. You don't hear that anywhere else. We'll talk with him tomorrow. Very excited for that. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word.